Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street, and we are here to show you some tips and tricks on how to sew all of the different blocks together for our Pink Lemonade quilt. Now, to sew along with this, you will need to make sure to go to our shop. You can click on the link below to get to our shop and get your copy of Pink Lemonade. For our lemon block, you're going to need to have your lemon template F piece and your white outer curve template E piece. And what I like to do when I'm sewing curves, I am a pin person when I am sewing my curves together. So I am going to fold my lemon piece in half, finger press that center, then I'm going to fold my curve in half, finger press that center as well, and then I like to nest these together. So I want to make sure that those presses are going the same direction so I can nest it right in there with it. And then I'm going to stick a pin right there. I know there are some people that are really good at sewing curves without pins. Kimmy prefers to sew without pins. I just find that I get better precision with my curves when I use pins. So you're going to line up the edge piece. Make sure you want to line it up going flat against this side. And stick a pin in there. And then same with the other side. Stick your pin in there. And then you can go ahead and kind of stretch this out a little bit because it is cut on a curve. You've got that bias to play with. Kind of finger it up to where it needs to be, find approximately that center again, and put a pin there. And then I like to do one more in between these. If you prefer to use the glue-based method for sewing your curves, we actually do have a tutorial on our YouTube page for that. So you can go ahead and search that if you want to try that method out and see if that method is your preferred method. Okay, so now that I've got all of these pinned in place, it kind of lays that block nice and flat for me. So I'm going to take it to my machine, and I'm using my 1/4 inch foot. So this foot has a line to the side of it. Let me just show you. It shows me that 1/4 inch seam. So I can line this up right there along the edge, and it's going to help me get that 1/4 inch. I am going to sew with my needle down, so that's going to help me be able to twist and move the fabric as I need to so that I can get that nice curve. So now we've got our seam sewn on. We're going to go ahead and press this. I always like to press it towards the outer curve. So that's going to just help it keep nice and flat. If you want to make sure it gets a little bit of extra flatness, you can add a little bit of starch, or else we just like to use our clapper after we've pressed it to hold that in, and it gives it a nice flat seam. For our leaf block, we're using a very similar method as we did for our lemon block, but we have 2 outside curves. So you're going to need your green leaf template G, and then 2 of your outer curve template E's in white. But we're going to start off with the same concept as we did for our lemon. I'm going to fold the leaf in half, and I'm going to go ahead and finger press on both sides. Go ahead and just get that press in now. Then we're going to focus on just one side of the outer curve first. So fold that in half, finger press that. Then again, we're going to line it up exactly the same way we did with our lemon. Nest our seams in our little presses in there together. Add a pin, line up the edges. And with this, you've got a little bit of a curve that you're following along there. Line up that edge. And then add a couple of pins in the center as you kind of just Stretch this out a little bit. Don't stretch it too much. Again, we do know that we're dealing with a bias. Bias can stretch quite a bit, but you just want to give it just enough stretch to be able to line those two pieces up with each other. Okay, we've pressed our seam again towards our outer curve, being careful not to press our finger press on the opposite side. Now we're going to just repeat that process. Only this side, instead of lining up with just the green leaf piece, you're going to line up right here along the white seam now. Go ahead and sew our 1/4 inch seam on this side, and then our leaf block will be complete. So for our flower blocks, you're going to need the white squares. And again, you can get all of the sizes out of our Pink Lemonade Quilt Pattern on our website. You're going to need a light pink template A, and then you're going to need a dark pink template J, and a dark pink template H. So you'll definitely want to make sure that you're doing each of the sides of your flowers using the templates, because they are going to be specific to that size of the flower. This will help, especially if you're using prints, that you're not going to mess up how the flower lays. And then you're also going to need your yellow flower center template K. So to start sewing the flower together, first you're going to want to start with the smaller pink outsides with the light pink center. And you're going to want to line these edges up. So you'll see on each of our templates, we've got a little notch on each side of your petal, and that is for your 1/4 inch seam. So you're going to line those up, and then you're going to sew your 1/4 inch seam right down that edge. Now that we've got that sewn, go ahead and press that. It doesn't really matter which direction you press it. You can kind of just decide preference. I prefer when I'm sewing these flower blocks just to press the seam to the outside. Why? I don't really know, but that's just where I seem to press all of them. So go ahead and add the second petal to the other side following the same method. Okay, now that our flower is complete, we're going to go ahead and attach it to the back. So we are going to applique. This is a raw edge applique. If you prefer to do needle turn applique, you can do that. You might want to add additional seam allowance to the template itself so that you've got that additional yardage. If you're worried about basting, you can use some spray basting to keep things in place just so that it doesn't move. I found that it actually isn't that big of a deal to just add a couple of pins just to hold the flower kind of right there along that edge. Spread it out, make sure you're folding it right there. So your curve really should kind of form on its own for you, just because of the size of the flower. It should fit just nicely within that block. So like I said, we're gonna go ahead and raw edge applique this. We actually did this a couple of different ways on our test quilts. I like to do a blanket stitch. So that is the raw edge method that I prefer, as a blanket stitch. Kimmy actually just went ahead and just sewed within just like 1/8 of an inch in. And some people like to do that, maybe 1 seam or 2 seams even, just to kind of give it that little bit of contrast. If you want to do just with some white thread, that would give you some really fun contrast for that. If you want it to blend in, pick one of the colors to help that blend in a little bit more. Obviously, because we are using both a light and a dark, it is going to show up more on one of the petals than the other petal. You could also get some variegated thread if you wanted to, just to kind of help blend all the way through just a little bit more. One additional thing on the raw edge applique, because we're going to add our flower center down here at the bottom, you don't need to do the applique across this side. I do recommend just sewing just a quick little seam along that side, and then also along both sides of the petal on each side of the square, just to hold that in place so that it doesn't shift and move on you when we're piecing the quilt. Okay, so I went ahead and I did a white stitch just so that you could see what that blanket stitch looks like. So almost to me gives it that feel of a hand stitch look around each of the petals, which is really why I like that blanket stitch. And then again, I went ahead and just did a straight stitch right there along the side, across this center, and along here, just to help keep things in place. Now that that has been appliqued on, we're going to go ahead and add our center. And again, you're just going to line it up right here along the corner. It's going to fit nicely right along that curve. Throw a couple of pins in it just to hold it in place. And then we're just going to do the same blanket stitch on this flower center that we did on the outside of the petal. And again, if it's something that you want to just blend in, then find you a yellow that matches the fabric and it will blend right in. Okay, so there we have our finished flower. We've got our blanket stitch along the curve of this flower center, and then just a straight stitch along the sides just to help to keep it in place as we put this into our quilt pattern itself. Okay, so for our flying geese blocks, you're going to need the larger pink square, and then you're going to need 4 of the smaller white squares. So remember, all of the sizes can be found in our Pink Lemonade Quilt Pattern. You can find that on our website. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with 2 of these white squares. We're going to lay them across one corner and then across the opposite corner. And this is a no waste flying geese method, and we're going to make 4 flying geese blocks at a time. We're going to take our ruler, go ahead and line that up from corner to corner, and draw a line. I like to throw a couple of pins in just to help hold things in place as I move it over to my sewing machine. And then we're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam on each side of this line. Now that we're all done sewing, we're going to go ahead and trim right along that line. So you'll just line your ruler up again from corner to corner. Cut along that line, and then we're going to press these open. So what you want to do when sewing the flying geese is you want to press against the white. I know we typically press towards the dark side, but you want to press these up. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of seam bulk in here when we add in the other squares. Okay, now we're going to take a 3rd square. We're going to line it up in the opposite corner of where our others are at. Draw corner to corner. And then again, sew a 1/4 of an inch seam on either side of that line. So same process as before. Now that we've sewn on either side of the line, we're going to cut directly on that line. And then go ahead and press again your blocks up against the white. And then we're going to want to make sure that we trim the dog ears on each of the corners of these geese. If we don't, they will ghost in your quilt, and you don't want that. Okay, so now that we have finished our first 2 flying geese, you're going to go ahead and repeat that exact same process with the second half, and you're going to end up with 4 flying geese. Once you have all of your pink and yellow flying geese, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the block itself. So to create each of the flying geese squares, you're going to place a yellow flying geese on top of a pink flying geese. Go ahead and just match those ends up and go ahead and sew a 1/4 of inch seam. Our flying geese block is now complete. I prefer when I press a flying geese block to press it again away from this point. I want to press it up against the other. Otherwise, if you press it this direction, it just seems to the seam bulk just is a lot when you've got the seams on both sides and then you're adding an additional. So I always press it away from the point just to help reduce the seam bulk. Go ahead and repeat that with the rest of your yellow, pink, and white squares. Now we're going to go ahead and sew our lemon slice together. So for our lemon slice, you're going to need 2 of the light pink template B's and 1 of the dark pink template A. And what we're going to do is we're going to just sew those light pieces just alongside each of those dark pieces. You will notice we've cut little notches in the templates down below, and that's really just to help you line these pieces up. You want to line it right up there on that edge of the notch across the bottom. I'm going to stick a pin in it just to help hold it in place, and then go ahead and sew my 1/4 inch seam. So I know the quilting rule is typically to press to the dark side, but in this case you're going to definitely want to press to the light side. Otherwise you're going to end up with quite a bit of seam bulk down in this corner piece. So we've got one side attached. We're going to go ahead and add the second side. Again, line those points up down there at the bottom. I'm just going to stick a pin in just to help hold that in place, and then sew my 1/4 inch seam. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and sew our first curve onto our lemon slice. So fold your segments in half. I like to think of these as the segments of our pink lemons. You're going to use a white template. It's the template E is this first outer curve. It's going to be white. Nest those presses up together. Line up your edges. You want to try to keep this edge nice and straight against each other. That'll just help line it up after it is sewn as well. So try to keep that lined up nicely. If you want to, because this is like a little bigger edge that we're lining up than our lemon or our leaf curves that have just a little small piece, go ahead and stick your needle in, your pin, and do a couple of tucks in it. That will just kind of help keep this lined up a little bit better for you. Keeps it from moving as you're sewing. You just want to make sure that you are removing your pins before you sew over them still, but this will just kind of help keep things lined up as you're getting close to that section. Okay, and then give a little bit of a stretch there so you can get these lined up. I like to, when I've got a seam underneath, I like to be able to put one of my pins in that seam just to kind of help that seam from not folding over when I sew it, because I know sometimes, especially when we're sewing along this direction and the seam is also going that direction, sometimes it has a tendency to fold backwards on us. And I want to make sure that that seam does not fold backwards. So sticking a pin in there just helps me remember exactly where that seam is, so I can just pay closer attention when I get to that spot and make sure that it's not folding on me. That again just helps your block stay nice and flat when your seams don't fold up on you. Okay, and then as we sew our 1/4 inch seam, just remember, sew with your needle down and just go slow around these curves. Okay, so now that we have our template C to the outside of each of those AB pieces, now we're going to basically follow the exact same process that we just did, and we are going to add our dark pink template D. So again, we're going to finger press, line those up, 1/4 inch seam. And then after that, we're going to add in our outer curve template E. So get our finger presses in, line that up, and then that will complete our lemon slice block. So So we have our lemon block completed. And now remember, as you're sewing all of your lemon slice blocks together, there will be some where you will flip-flop the color, so you'll have dark pink on the outside and light pink on the inside of some of those blocks. So keep that in mind as you're sewing all of your different pieces together. For our triangle block, you're going to need the green and white squares, as well as the green and the white strips that go along with those. And again, you can find all of the sizes and everything that you need for this inside of our Pink Lemonade Quilt Pattern. So check out our shop and grab that. So to start with our triangle blocks, we're going to take our green square and we're going to take our white strips and we're going to sew on each side of the green square. Now we're going to take the other white strips and just sew them across the top and the bottom of the square, and you're really going to end up with a square in square block basically at this point. Okay, now you're going to just repeat that exact same process with the white square and the two different green strips. Now that we've got both of our squares put together, we're going to turn them into our triangles. So you're going to take one square and place on top of the other one. It really doesn't matter whether it's the white or the green on top. Line up those corners as best you can. And what I like to do, especially because it's these inside corners that we really want to line up so that it shows up on the other square perfectly, is I like to take a pin, stick it in the center of this one on the top, and then I'm going to go underneath, stick it in the center of that one, push that through, and then I'm going to put a pin there because that means that those 2 points are now lined up. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Stick it right there in the center, in the bottom. Make sure they're lined up. And now those are the most important points that I really want to line up to have my triangle square show up the way I want it to. These points, some of them are going to be trimmed off anyways, but we want to make sure that those points line up. Then we're going to take our ruler and a fabric marking pen or pencil, whichever you prefer. We want to line our ruler up again right along those points, and then we're going to draw a line. Now you'll notice that because we lined up on these points, these end pieces aren't necessarily lining up exactly on the corner. That's fine, it's not a big deal. Like I said, we're going to be trimming that anyway. Now you want to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam on each side of that line. Now that we have our seam, we want to go ahead and just put our ruler back on here on that line, and we're going to cut on the line. I probably should have grabbed my larger rotary cutter because we got a couple of these little seam bulks here and I didn't. So I'll have to go over it a couple of times. Now when we open it up, we have our triangle blocks. Things are lined up nicely on the corners. And now we're going to go ahead and press these. So I've just noticed as sewing this quilt together to press these blocks open. The reason for that is you're going to be sewing 4 of these blocks together, and some of that seam bulk can add up over time. So if you press it open, it just seems to help a little bit with the seam bulk. Okay, now that our block is complete, we can go ahead and trim this to the size that we need inside the quilt. So for this, you're going to need to check the quilt pattern to get the size that needs to be trimmed to, but I'm just going to walk you through a couple of steps to help make trimming easier. So you're going to want to find your center point. So what I like to do is fold it over, and I want to match these seams, not the edge seams. So that just helps make that center more centers, because we're going to trim out some of these outside edges. So go ahead and fold that over, match your seams up right here. Kind of use your fingers to just kind of match them right up with each other. And then we're going to just do a finger press along here. And then you're going to flip it the opposite direction, and you're going to do that exact same thing. line it up right there, finger press it, and then that is going to give us our center point in the block. And then at that point we can take our ruler, and then you're going to want to take the finished size of the block in the quilt pattern, divide it in half, because that's what you're going to want to use on your ruler to find that halfway mark, match it up to this center point, and then that's what you're going to be trimming off on each side of the block. So you'll do one side at a time, flip it over, again find your center, line your ruler up, and then trim this side, and then just repeat with all 4 sides until your blocks are all trimmed. Now that you've got some tips and tricks on putting together our Pink Lemonade quilt, you should hopefully be successful in putting together your own version. We'd love to see your finished version of Pink Lemonade, so feel free to tag us in your social media posts if you've posted it, or else shoot us an email with an image of your quilt. It's always fun to see what others have come up with when we're putting together our quilt patterns. And again, you can find everything that you need for the sizes of the blocks, the templates, in the quilt pattern in our shop. So head over to our shop, and while you're there, check out all of the other really great patterns that are there and find your next quilting project. Happy quilting!